Hi everybody, so last time we talked about the switch statement, and before that we talked about the if statement, and we've seen that we can execute some code conditionally based on a condition. If it's true, then we execute that code, and if it's not, then we pass that code. So today we're going to talk about loops. If you come from other programming language, you probably heard of the for loop, the while loop, and the do while loop, and they are the same thing here but just in JavaScript syntax. And if you're new to programming, don't worry, we're going to explain everything in this lecture. So let's head into code and see what looping is all about. So here I have Plunker open, and as you see we're using the strict mode as we've been using that since we introduced the strict mode. So to create a loop, we first say for, and then we use we declare a variable, and usually it's called I. In or most of the time you're gonna find that people call it I if we're looping through, and we set it to a value, and then we have a condition, and then you put a semicolon, and then you have a condition. For example, I'll say I is smaller than 5, and then after that you put a semicolon again, and you have an afterthought. What's an afterthought is an expression that gets executed after every repetition of our loop. So here I'm going to say I++, which means every repetition I is going to increase by 1. I'm going to explain everything, but let me write the code first, and then we're going to explain what is going on here. So console log, and I'm going to print I, which is this variable that we're having here. So I'm going to run this code so you see the output yourself. As you see, it starts with 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, which means it's been run 5 times. So what is going on here? So we have a for loop, and we declare a variable and say that it starts with 0. Then we say, then we're gonna execute this line of code if I keeps on being smaller than 5, which is true in the initialization phase because I is equal to 0, which means 0 is smaller than 5, which is true. That means we're gonna execute that code. The afterthought here, this expression gets executed every single time we finish this block of code. So we're gonna initialize by 0, and we're gonna see if it's true that 0 is smaller than 5, then we're gonna execute this code printing 0, and then we are gonna run the I++, making I equal to 1, and then we're gonna test again to see if 1 is smaller than 5, and then we're gonna execute that code which prints 1 here, and then we're gonna execute the afterthought, which is I++, making it 2. Then we see if 2 is smaller than 5, it's true. We console log, and then we I++ again. 3 smaller than 5, correct. That's why we see 3 here. 4, then we execute this again. I++ makes it 4. 4 smaller than 5, correct. And then we execute this again. I is equal to 5 now. Is 5 smaller than 5? No, so we exit the loop. And we can make sure that we exit the loop when we execute this console log. Just for demonstration purposes, the loop has ended. And if I run this right now, let me clean this, rerun that. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, the loop has ended, which means we are out of the loop and we executed this console.log. So this is the idea of looping, is that you have some kind of variable and some kind of condition and a expression that has to be done after the repetition of after executing the block of code to change the condition, to change the value that we're testing, so to see if we exit the loop or not. Okay, so we're looped it through this 5 times. So do you remember the break keyword that we just had on the switch statement? It could be used in the loop, in any kind of loop, and you might be asking what is the use of that. So let me just do an if statement here, and I'm gonna test if I, the variable that we're having here, is equal to 3. And if that's true, we're gonna break. So what is gonna happen here? Can you guess? Okay, so it prints 0, 1, 2, and it says the loop has ended, which means that first of all, I is equal to 0. Is I is equal to 3? No, then we console log. And we go to I++. If when I is 1, is I is equal to 3? No, console log. I++, I is equal to 2. If I is 2 equal to 3? No, then we console log. But then we plus plus, and then I is equal to 3. If is 3 smaller than 5? Uh, yes, correct. We enter the loop. We enter the block of code, but here we have a condition that says if I is equal to 3, which is correct, we break. So whenever we get to the break keyword inside of the loop, we get out of the current loop. So this is our loop, and we execute a break. We're gonna right away break out of the loop and continue the code which is outside of the loop. And this is here the code that is a console log that says the loop has ended. So that's the break keyword. But what if I use a word which I'm gonna introduce right now called continue? So is it different than break? Let's see, and I'm going to execute this right now, and you see 0, 1, 2, 4. What is going on here? So continue, unlike break, you don't break out of the loop, but you escape the current iteration or the current repetition of the loop. So let me trace that with you. I is equal to 0. Is 0 equal to 3? No, so we console log. Is 1 equal to 3? No, so we console log. Is 2 equal to 3? No, so we console log. Is 3 is equal to 3? Then we're going to do continue, which means we're going to escape the current iteration of the loop, and we're not going to continue on executing the next lines of this repetition, but we're going to right away go to the I++ and change that to 4. That means that we're not going to execute the console.log that you're seeing here. And then I becomes 4, and then we're going to check again. Is I is equal to 4? No. Then we console log. That's why we see 4, but we don't see 3, because whenever we reach I is equal to 3, we're going to continue, but we're never going to reach that line in this iteration. And that's why continue is different than break, because break gets out of the loop completely. Continue just escapes the iteration that we are at currently. What we also can do is we can put a loop inside of another loop, which is called a nested loop. So if we do that, we can create another loop and say, but we can now not use I again because we already used it, so we could use another name, which usually people use J, and we can put some condition here. Let's say J is smaller than 3, and we could do J++. So what is going on here? What does that mean, like having a loop inside of a loop? That means that for every iteration, for the big loop here, we are gonna run this loop, which means when I is equal to 0, we're gonna use this loop 3 times, because J has to be smaller than 3. We're starting at 0, and we're incrementing J by 1 every single repetition of this loop inside. And then, so for I is equal to 0, we're gonna run this 3 times, and whenever we finish this, we are gonna go and increment I becomes 1, and then we're gonna, for I is equal to 1, we're gonna restart that again, and which means for 1 we're gonna run it 3 times. So for every single iteration for the big one, we are gonna run the smaller one, or the one that is nested, 3 times. So let me show you this by console logging and saying here I is equal to 0, I is equal plus, we can concatenate strings using the plus sign with a variable. We're gonna get to that whenever we get to the operators. So I is equal to, and then we're gonna set this to I, so we get the I at the current moment console logging this, and then we are gonna say j is equal to, okay, we need that inside of a string, and we're gonna say that set this to j. So let me print this and let's see the output. Okay, but we need a little bit of space, so we're gonna get a little bit of empty space here, so it looks more. Maybe instead of an empty space, we can put, yeah. Okay. So you see first, we have I is equal to 0 and j is equal to 0, and as I mentioned, it's going to run 3 times when I is equal to 0, I0, j1, I0, j2, and I equal 1, and then we are going to finish this second loop, and we're going to start the first, we're going to increment the first loop, and then I becomes 1, and then j starts as 0 again, and then for I is equal to 1, j is going to run 3 times, j is equal to 1, j is equal to 2, and then we finish this loop, and then we go on, increment the first loop to I is equal to 2, and then I is equal to 2, j is equal to 0, I is equal to 2, j is equal to 1, I is equal to 2, j is equal to 2, and then this loop finishes and goes on, I is equal to 3, and so on until I becomes 4. We execute for I is equal to 4, the second loop inside of it, and we'll run j becomes 0, 1, 2, and then we increment, finish this loop, and we get up to the first loop, increment its value, and I becomes 5, so we check if 5 is smaller than 5. That's not true, so we get out and console log the loop has ended. One thing you probably might be asking, what if I say if j is equal to 0 or j is equal to 1, I'm sorry, break. So would that take me out of all the loops or just the loop that we're currently on? So let's test this and see what output do we get. Okay, so when I is equal to 0, we try to execute the loop inside, and it says j is equal to 0, so it starts at j is equal to 0, tests if j is equal to 1, and we console log that, which gets us this output here, I is equal to 0 and j is equal to 0. But whenever j becomes 1 after we increment it and we test, and then we break out of the loop, that breaks out of the loop, getting out of this loop. But if we're breaking out of both loops, then we should actually just get the loop has ended. But we're still getting other lines, which means that we're only breaking out of this loop, and then we're incrementing I, making I is equal to 1, and then we're getting inside of this loop again, trying to run it, and starting at j is equal to 0, and checking if j is equal to 1, which is not because j is equal to 0. Then we're console logging I is equal to 1 and j is equal to 0. And then whenever j becomes 1, we break out of the loop, increment I becomes 2, and so on until we get to I is equal to 4. We break whenever j becomes 1, and the loop has ended because now we're checking when I is incremented to 5, we're checking if 5 is smaller than 5, which is not true. We get out and we print out this final console log. So this is the for loop. I'm sure whenever we talked about the nested loops, it gets a little bit complex, but with trial, you're gonna get the hang of it. Next time, we're gonna talk about the while loop, and after that, we're gonna talk about the do while loop. And see you next time.